Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first ever edition of Zeke-ollege Football. I'm your host, Zeke Kransdorf. Now, we got a jam-packed show ahead of you, but first things first, just like to introduce myself for those who do not know. First things first, I am a current attendee of Bryant University. For those of you who are listening on WJMF Radio live, you probably are not surprised to hear that. Um, although I do have some experience calling games. I am the radio voice of the Bryant University football team, but I've also had experience calling volleyball, baseball, basketball, soccer, and a whole host of a bunch of different sports. But football's my passion. Football's been my passion, and specifically college football is my passion. Um, Other than being an avid supporter of Bryant athletics, I'm also a fan of the Missouri Tigers. Out of the SEC, that is my favorite FBS college football team. And that's really what we're going to be discussing throughout the entirety of this semester is we're going to be talking about FBS college football teams. So FBS is those Division One schools who you've heard of. Your Alabamas, your Florida States, Oregon, Utah, Ohio State, all of these teams that are national brands, national names that you have heard of. Now, there's sort of uh, been a little bit of change this year more than most. Conferences have dissolved, and we're really going to get into a lot of fun material throughout the course of this show. Now, uh, this is probably one of the best times to start covering college football because it's sort of like a reset point. Oftentimes in comic books, you'd see these sort of resets. DC had it with the New 52. Uh, Marvel's had it a bunch of times. That's really what we're seeing in college football as well. What people know about college football is sort of changing as we speak. There is no more Pac-12 conference. There's now just two schools remaining in it. The Pac-2, we'll cover them a little bit later on. New schools are joining into the FBS. And it's really a different landscape. Oklahoma and Texas, no longer in the Big 12. They've moved over to the SEC. Schools like USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington are in the Big Ten now. Colorado, Utah, Arizona State, they're all in the Big 12 now. Just a lot of change. And really, it's going to be a fun time. Now, for those of you who have not seen my Instagram post about what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be touching on every single school in FBS college football throughout the course of the semester. All 134 teams we are going to mention and go through and preview. But today we're going to start off with one of the conferences that really hasn't been seen on a big scale, but it does have a big impact on college football as we know it, and that is Conference USA. Now, for the average listener who has most likely not devoted a lot of time to just sitting and watching college football to the chagrin of his suite mates or family or you name it, you might not know what Conference USA is. So it's one of the smaller conferences, one of what's known as the Group of Five conferences. And it has a bunch of teams that are relatively new to the FBS. So it's got teams like Florida International, Liberty, Louisiana Tech, Middle Tennessee State, New Mexico State, Sam Houston, UTEP, Western Kentucky, Jacksonville State, and finally Kennesaw State. So if any of those teams ring a bell, congratulations. But if not, well, then I got some good news for you because I will be previewing each and every one of those teams. Now, we're going to start off by talking about Jacksonville State. Now, Jacksonville State is one of the newer teams to the FBS. They joined just last year, and they actually had a lot of success coming up from the FCS level. Now, I keep on using these terms FBS and FCS, and it's a little confusing, and I get that. So, Division One college football is broken up into two different sections. One that's known as FBS, which stands for Football Bowl System, and one that stands for FCS, which stands for Football Championship System. And that really just determines what sort of playoff structure they have. In the FCS, they have a large tournament to determine who the FCS champion is. And meanwhile, in the FBS, they have a bunch of bowl games, and those bowl games determine who the champion is through what's known as the college football playoffs. So basically, FBS is just it's like the major leagues of college football, and FCS is almost like AAA in a way, where it's not developmental per se. They're both developmental, but the competition's a step up. So when you move from the FCS to the FBS, oftentimes you'll see a regression of sorts. If you had a bunch of success in the FCS and you move to the FBS, you might not have the same success. That being said, Jacksonville State sort of bucked that trend. They were able to get away fairly successfully, and they actually ended up having a really good season last year, considering that they were a first-year team. They finished the season with a bowl win in the New Orleans Bowl. So that's more than most schools can say already, getting a win in a bowl game. But they finished the season with 9 wins in their first season, which is borderline unheard of. And when we touch on the other school that joined with them, we'll show you why 9-4 is so important. But it's year number 2 in the FBS for their head coach, Rich Rodriguez. He's been all over the place. He's been, head coach of Michigan for a little bit, head coach of Arizona for a little bit. He's been around in college football for a while, and Rich Rodriguez was able to really get his team looking good, looking professional, and his fast-paced, high-tempo offense was able to actually gain a lot of traction and get them to that 9-4 mark. Now, looking forward to 2024 and what I expect out of Jacksonville State in that year, it's hard to say whether I expect improvement or regression. I think they might regress a little bit. They lost some key players to graduation. A lot of times when they move up a team from FCS to FBS, players will stay an extra year to try to say, hey, I played some FBS college football. Teams come and draft me. And that was the case with Jacksonville State quarterback Zion Webb, who added a real rushing threat. Last year, Jacksonville State had a 2-quarterback system, both Zion Webb and Logan Smothers. Webb is gone, so it's going to be the Logan Smothers show from now on. So I feel like whether or not Jacksonville State improves, uh, stays the same, or regresses sort of depends on Smothers' performance. If he's able to sort of get the offense working, get the offense into a good rhythm, I would expect them to most likely stay the same. I don't see any reason why not. But if Logan Smothers, struggles, maybe isn't the answer for Jacksonville State, they don't really have that many other options at quarterback other than Smothers. So it would it would be a throwaway season at that point. Now, moving forward towards FIU, uh, actually, you know what? We're gonna pause on FIU. We're gonna touch on Sam Houston first. So Sam Houston came up with Jacksonville State. Those two schools moved from FCS to FBS at the same time. And really, they had a disappointing first year. So almost the opposite of Jacksonville State there. They finished 3-9 on the season. Uh, their senior quarterback, Keegan Shoemaker, was disappointing. They did lose a lot of close games. They were actually the last FBS school to get a win. So there was a lot to be desired from Sam Houston in that first year. But there is some hope for the Bearcats out there. Um, you know, you don't have Keegan Shoemaker anymore, but you do have a talented quarterback transferring in. Jace Bauer, who was the starter, the backup quarterback who became the starter over at Central Michigan, transfers in. He's a talented runner, accurate enough of a thrower, but I'm excited to see him in Conference USA with the Bearcats, see how they will do. But yeah, you can see sort of the two sides of the coin for moving up from FCS to FBS. You can either be more similar to Jacksonville State, have a great season in year one, 9-4 with a bowl game win, or you could be like Sam Houston, 3-9 and finishing near the bottom of the conference. And that goes to show, there isn't really that much predictability with college football. Predictions, uh, they could be wrong. They could absolutely be wrong. Many people picked Sam Houston over Jacksonville State because they said, hey, Sam Houston sort of rested more of their players, really geared up to compete in year one, and they just didn't do that. So it's hard to say what my expectations. I think Sam Houston State will improve from their year one performance. I don't think there's not much room to go downhill from a 3-9 season and going 2-6 in conference. But I think they'll be at least a little bit better. Maybe not bowl game yet, but we'll get to my breakdown of the rosters in a little bit. Now, the next team we're going to preview is going to be FIU. So Florida International University, coached by Mike McIntyre. They've been a relatively consistent team, but in this case, consistent is not very good. 4-8 for the past 2 seasons. Now, in 2022, they were 2-6 in conference, and last year they were only 1-7 in conference. That sole win coming against Sam Houston. So there's a lot to be desired, but it's not like FIU doesn't have talent. They do have some talent, and his name is Keone Jenkins. And Keone Jenkins, he was a redshirt freshman last year. Now he's going to be a sophomore, so they have some time to develop him. Has an entire offseason as the starting quarterback to really assert himself in that role and improve. Uh, Last year, he replaced the starter, who was Grayson James. Grayson James was not very good uh, to start off the season. So they brought in Keone Jenkins and gave him the starting role. And they showed some promise at the start of the season. They actually did fairly well in their non-conference schedule, uh, but they really faltered at the end of the season. So, you know, it's one of those things where I would like to think that FIU will improve. I think they might be able to even reach 5-7 with their schedule. Um, but we will break down the schedules a little bit later as well. Uh, but yeah, they started off the season 3-1 before they went on a little skid to in the middle of the season and ended with 4 consecutive losses. So FIU, a lot to uh, work with, but they have to make that jump. You cannot continue to just be in the bottom of the conference, especially with Conference USA being as open as it is. Now, moving on to Louisiana Tech. Louisiana Tech also fairly consistent and also fairly consistently bad. 3-9 in 2 consecutive seasons for the Louisiana Tech Bulldogs and head coach Sonny Cumbie. Uh, Things are not really looking up for Louisiana Tech in 2024. One of their more talented players, wide receiver Smoke Harris, has no eligibility left. I believe he's declaring for the NFL draft. And they're also without their starting quarterback from last year, Hank Bachmeier, who transferred in from Boise State, has left. He's now going to be playing for the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. So when you've gone 3-9 in 2 consecutive seasons, and then you have a lot of talented players leaving, not as much talent coming in, I'm not very optimistic about Louisiana Tech. And really, a lot of the onus on that falls against Sonny Cumbie. Can he turn it around? Is Sonny Cumbie on the hot seat? I would like to think so. So if he starts off the season poorly, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a coaching change down in Louisiana. Now, the next team we're going to preview is going to be Middle Tennessee State. So, for the first time in about 18 years, the Blue Raiders have a new head coach. No more Rick Stockstill. They have someone new. I mean, it's a rare uh, place for Middle Tennessee to be. They've been a fairly consistent program and towards the top of I was gonna say they've been towards the top of the Conference USA for the past uh, almost decade. They've had some middling years towards the end. But they've really just sort of struggled at the end. And I like the coaching decision that they made. You know, we we've seen this a lot in 2020 at the end of 2023, cutting ties with longtime coaches who begin to stumble a little bit, and they brought in Derek Mason, former Vanderbilt head coach. He's a defensive minded coach, so he will hopefully improve the defense of the Blue Raiders. Now they were not a terrible team. They played some pretty competitive games, but uh, you know a lot more to be desired. You can't go 3-9 in Conference USA and expect to make a difference. But I like Derek Mason as a coach. I think he'll do well. Maybe some improvement, but they also have some changes in their personnel as well. Uh, One of their leading receivers, Elijah Metcalf, left and is now going to be playing for Marshall. And then really, uh, it's I feel bad putting a lot of onus on specific players. Uh, I know they're college kids just as I am myself. That being said, Nick Vadiato needs to improve a little bit. He had solid numbers, 23 passing touchdowns, but he did have 13 interceptions. So if he gets a little bit more consistent, less turnovers there, uh, I would expect the Blue Raiders to maybe make some noise where people might not have given them as much credit before. Now, working our way through Conference USA, we're going to reach the UTEP Miners. They had a very disappointing season. They had a longtime quarterback, Gavin Hardison, who they expected to really carry them, but they were marred by some poor coaching decisions. And that's why they got a change at head coach. Dana Dimmel, gone from UTEP, no longer the head coach there. Now we have Scotty Walden, who's coming in after being the head coach of the Austin Peay Governors. And with Walden comes in a bunch of players from Austin Peay. So if we have this sort of infusion of talent coming in from the FCS level, how well will that translate? We've seen this sort of thing happen before. Specifically last year at Texas State. They had a great season last year. Um, for their standards, 8-5. They're in a bowl win, their first bowl win, really in their entire FBS history. And really that comes with the change at coach, bringing in someone like G.J. Kinney, who brought a lot of his players with him. He was the head coach of Incarnate Word, another FCS school, the year before he joined Texas State, brought in a bunch of players for Texas State, and all of a sudden you see a difference. Maybe the same thing can happen with UTEP. Now, they do have a tough non-conference schedule, so they really have to perform well in conference play if they hope to make a bowl game here, but we'll have to wait and see. Again, I will break down my schedule preview in the second half of the show, and then towards the end, I will touch on some news around college football as well. So after UTEP, we have Western Kentucky. Now, Western Kentucky, very interesting school to talk about. The Hilltoppers, they had a huge comeback victory in their bowl game to beat Old Dominion. And that came really at the hands of a quarterback who had entered into the transfer portal. They played him in the bowl game anyway. He decides to come back to Western Kentucky. Uh, However, they do have a quarterback competition going, so it's going to be interesting to watch what they do in the spring game, see if anyone's going to be named the starter there. Because, yes, Caden Veltkamp had a great bowl game, but they also brought in a talented quarterback in TJ Finley. I know I just talked about Texas State last year. Uh, he was the quarterback of Texas State last year. And moving over to Western Kentucky, high-powered passing offense. Uh, it's going to be interesting to see who wins that QB job. Really, that would sort of influence my decisions in terms of predictions. But I would say the biggest change for Western Kentucky is that that quarterback position. They've over the past couple years had some fairly good quarterbacks coming in there, or fairly good college quarterbacks. Can't speak for their play in the NFL per se, but Bailey Zappi, who transferred in from Houston Baptist, and then Austin Reed as well. Uh, Austin Reed declaring for the draft, so it's just going to be Veltkamp and TJ Finley in what I suspect to be a two-man race for that Western Kentucky quarterback job. Now, we're going to double back uh, to New Mexico State now. Now, New Mexico State is one of those teams that really surprised a lot of people last year. They had just been to a bowl game for the first time in probably 30 years or so in 2022. They start off the 2023 season in week 0 with a loss against UMass. People are like, well, it was a good run for New Mexico State. But New Mexico State really turned it around. A 10-win season for Jerry Kell and quarterback Diego Pavia. Now, both of those players are no longer at New Mexico State. Jerry Kill stepped down for health reasons and is now an offensive analyst over at Vanderbilt. Diego Pavia transferred over to Vanderbilt as well. So 2 of the biggest sort of consistent pieces for New Mexico State are gone. They, in a haste to try to, keep their program together, named Tony Sanchez, their wide receivers coach, as the new head coach. He was formerly a coach at UNLV. It did not really go well. I'm not optimistic for how New Mexico State will do, because really I see them as one of the teams that will most likely regress a little bit. And it pains me to say I like New Mexico State. I really do. They're a great story last year, but a lot of playmakers leaving, a really player-first head coach leaving, and yeah, it's not really looking like a great opportunity for Tony Sanchez to step into, and hopefully it'll go well for them, but I'm not optimistic about New Mexico State. Now, the final 2 teams are going to cover. First things first, we're going to start off with Kennesaw State. It's their first year in the FBS. We talked about Jacksonville State. We talked about Sam Houston State and how they moved into the FBS. Kennesaw State was 3-6 last year in their final FCS year. That's mainly just because they were sort of redshirting players, preparing for their move to FBS. So I wouldn't, use that as a sirens call saying, oh, it's all over for Kennesaw State. But it's really going to fall on Brian Bohannon, their head coach. How will they adjust to the FBS? Bohannon hasn't had a winning record since 2021. So it's going to be interesting to look at. And then finally, we're going to talk about the champions. Liberty. Jamie Chadwell came over from Coastal Carolina. Really great job in year one at Liberty for Jamie Chadwell. They went undefeated uh, throughout conference play and their out of conference schedule. They made it all the way to the Fiesta Bowl, which is a huge deal for Liberty. First New Year's Six appearance for Liberty. And they got blown out by Oregon, but they're retaining a lot of talent. Jamie Chadwell is looking to repeat as Conference USA champions. They have a fairly good schedule to make a deep run in Conference USA. They have their star player Kadon Salter back at quarterback. Things are going to be looking good for the Liberty Flames. So that's the brief preview of every single team, but let's get into these schedules. So we're going to start off with Jacksonville State. But we will start off with Jacksonville State in about 3 minutes or so, because I'm going to take the first break of the show. So stay tuned. In about 3 minutes or so, we will get into the schedule breakdown. Absolutely on. So it was on the same Liberty reasons. So, interested. Mostly it used to Jackson. So. Alrighty, folks, we are back. So we're going to get into some schedule previews for Conference USA. Now, for Jacksonville State, they start off their season in Week 1 against Coastal Carolina, then play at Louisville, at Eastern Michigan, before they host Southern Miss, and then they have a bye week before they get into their conference slate. Starting off at Kennesaw State, then going to play New Mexico State, another bye week playing Middle Tennessee State, at Liberty, at Louisiana Tech, hosting FIU, hosting Sam Houston, and playing at Western Kentucky at the end of the year. Now, just breaking that down, the way I see that going, I see a loss to Coastal Carolina in Week 1, a loss to Louisville, and then 2 wins against Eastern Michigan and Southern Miss. I see them beating Kennesaw State and New Mexico State before their bye week, beating Middle Tennessee State, losing to Liberty, beating Louisiana Tech, beating FIU, beating Sam Houston, and losing to Western Kentucky. So I see an 8-4 record for Jacksonville State in year number 2. So I expect them to be around the same level as they were last year going into the bowl game. Now, meanwhile, for FIU, they play at Indiana, host Central Michigan, play at Florida Atlantic, and then they host Monmouth before they play Louisiana Tech and then have a bye week at Liberty, at UTEP, before they host Sam Houston, New Mexico State, and then they have another bye week at Jacksonville State, at Kennesaw State, and then they host Middle Tennessee State. I see them losing to Indiana, losing to Central Michigan, beating Florida Atlantic, beating Monmouth, beating Louisiana Tech, losing to Liberty, losing to UTEP, beating Sam Houston State, beating New Mexico State, losing to Jacksonville State, losing to Kennesaw State, and beating Middle Tennessee. So I see them going 6-6 in the upcoming season. Now, Liberty is one of those teams that I think is going to be very, very dangerous. Some people have predicted that they will go undefeated. I don't see them going undefeated, but I see them being very, very close to it. They, first things first, start off their season against hosting Campbell, which is an FCS school. They go on the road at New Mexico State, host UTEP, host East Carolina, then play at Appalachian State. They have a bye week. They play FIU at home. Then they are off, play at Kennesaw State, host Jacksonville State, at Middle Tennessee, at UMass, host Western Kentucky, and then play at Sam Houston. So I see them going 11-1 in this. They beat Campbell, beat New Mexico State, beat UTEP, beat East Carolina. They lose at Appalachian State, but that is their only loss on the season. I see them beating FIU. I see them beating Kennesaw State, Jacksonville State, Middle Tennessee, UMass, Western Kentucky, and Sam Houston. Now here's where things get a little tough. Louisiana Tech. I don't think Louisiana Tech's going to have a very good season. I mentioned that in my preview for them. I think that they'll most likely struggle a little bit. They start off the season playing Nicholls. I see that as a victory. They have a bye week. Then they play at North Carolina State. That's going to be a loss there. host Tulsa. I think that's another loss. In their game against FIU, I think they're going to lose that. Um, in their game against Middle Tennessee State, I think they have a win there. I do think they have a win there. Going to lose to New Mexico State. They're going to lose to UTEP, lose to Sam Houston State, lose to Jacksonville State, lose to Western Kentucky, lose to Arkansas, and then lose to Kennesaw State. So I see them going 2-10 with one win in conference. I don't see this as being a good season. I expect Sonny Cumbie to most likely be fired if this were to be the case. That being said, I hope the best for each and every one of these coaches and players. So I would not be surprised if this happened, hence why I predicted it. But I just think that with the talent on their roster, with what they've lost, I don't see that season going well for them. Next up, we got Middle Tennessee. They're playing Tennessee Tech, an FCS school, in week 1. I see them winning that one. Traveling to play at Ole Miss, they're going to lose that. Losing to Western Kentucky and losing to Duke, losing to Memphis as well. A very tough non-conference slate for Middle Tennessee. I see them losing to Louisiana Tech before they rally, beat Kennesaw State. They're going to lose to Jacksonville State. I see them beating UTEP, losing to Liberty, then beating New Mexico. I think they'll probably lose to New Mexico State and then lose to FIU. So 3-9 for Middle Tennessee State in Derek Mason's first year. But, the more he recruits, I think they might be able to be a little better. Again, it's tough to really know what to expect in year 1. But these are my preliminary predictions. For New Mexico State, they host Southeast Missouri. I think they win that one. They're going to lose to Liberty, lose to Fresno State. I think they beat Sam Houston State. I think they beat New Mexico in their non-conference game. Lose to Jacksonville State. Beat Louisiana Tech. I think they will. It's a tough call because, yeah, I think they will lose that one to FIU. Western Kentucky, they're probably going to lose that one as well. Lost to Texas A&M before beating Middle Tennessee, and then I see them lose to UTEP. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wins for New Mexico State. Now you could easily flip one of their games. Maybe you see them losing to New Mexico, maybe lose to Sam Houston. But it's just the way that I'm seeing it right now. Speaking of Sam Houston, they start off their season playing at Rice. That's probably a loss. At UCF, probably a loss. At Hawaii, again, most likely a loss. I see them losing to Texas State as well. Oh, sorry, I skipped over a game at UCF, which is also a loss. So I see them starting off the season 0-5. before they, pardon me, gonna take a sip of water here. Before they play UTEP, and I think that they will actually take the game off of UTEP here. I see them. They have a bye week. I think they sneakily can beat Western Kentucky here before they lose to FIU, beat Louisiana Tech, beat Kennesaw. You know what? I think out of all the teams, I think Sam Houston could probably lose to Kennesaw here, and then lose to Jacksonville State and Liberty. So matching their total from the last year, 3-9, but they do have a very tough schedule. So I will give them that. I do think they have a very tough schedule. So 3-9 is my prediction for Sam Houston. And now on to UTEP. They start off their season at Nebraska. I think that's a loss. They play Southern Utah, which is an FCS school. That's a win. Loss at Liberty. Loss at Colorado State. We went over that. I think that they are going to lose to Sam Houston State as well. Before they play at Western Kentucky, I think that's a loss as well. FIU, I believe I had FIU. I had FIU winning that game at UTEP, I believe. Let's see. No, I had them losing at UTEP, which is so UTEP will take that one. Then Louisiana Tech, I think that's a win. Uh, I think Middle Tennessee State's a win. Kennesaw State loss, a sneaky loss, but I think Kennesaw State will have a couple where they take a couple games, especially as they gel more as a team. Loss to Tennessee, and then a win in the final week. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wins for UTEP there. I think that they have a lot of talent. I don't see them making a crazy run either. Now, Western Kentucky, here's the bad news. You start the season off at Alabama, you're going to lose. Eastern Kentucky is going to be a win there. Middle Tennessee, that's a win. Toledo, I think they lose that game, and I think they lose to Boston College as well. Off before they beat UTEP. I think Sam Houston State will take a game off of them. Moving on, I think they beat Kennesaw State. I think they will beat New Mexico State, beat Louisiana Tech, with losses to Liberty, and then in the last game of the season, I think they will beat Jacksonville State. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wins. So a 7-5 record for Western Kentucky. And now we're getting into Kennesaw State. Loss at UTSA, loss at Louisiana, loss at San Jose State before their bye week. They will beat UT Martin. Loss to Jacksonville State. I think they'll beat Middle Tennessee State. I think they will lose to Liberty, lose to Western Kentucky. I think they will lose to UTEP, take a W from Sam Houston State. I think they will beat FIU as well. And then they will beat Louisiana Tech. So I think they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wins for Kennesaw State in year number 1. I think that's realistic. I don't see them, being a bottom feeder team, especially when you have 2 teams that I'm not very high on. in Middle Tennessee and in Louisiana Tech in this conference. That being said, I don't think that they will make a bowl game in year number one. I just don't see the talent on that roster to be a bowl game team in year number one. But yeah, those are my predictions for Conference USA. If you think that I am wrong, feel free to let me know in the comments. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're watching this on Instagram, you can also let me know in the comments. Go ahead and drop a follow for me over there. My account is Zeke-ollege Football. So Zeke.OLLEGE Football. So if you disagree with anything that I've said, feel free to go let me know. I'm not going to get butthurt about it. Again, in terms of predictions, this is just how I view these teams. That being said, again, go check out my Instagram page. Go follow Zeke-ollege Football on YouTube as well. The YouTube page is linked in my Instagram description. And continue listening because the more people hear about Zeke-ollege Football, the more people who talk about Zeke-ollege Football, I could get some fun guests on. It will be a pretty good time. Stay tuned for the Instagram to see what the next teams that we're previewing are. Some more news throughout the college football world. So just stay tuned because there will be a lot more fun to come. But before we leave, there is a little bit of news around college football that I do want to talk about. So for those of you who may not know, Chip Kelly, former coach for UCLA, they were having some disputes, both Chip and the UCLA athletic department. He was unhappy. They released a statement saying that they wanted to fire him, but then he won a couple games at the end of the season, so they decided to keep Chip Kelly as their head coach. There was a lot of frustration there. He felt like he couldn't be trusted. So Chip Kelly moves to Ohio State. He becomes the offensive coordinator at Ohio State, which some view as a downgrade, but some also viewed as just getting away from UCLA. And they hire a new head coach, Deshaun Foster, former running backs coach. He seems to be pretty well liked in the program. But it's certainly going to be interesting to sort of pay attention to any personnel moves, whether players will transfer from UCLA to Ohio State to follow Chip Kelly, whether or not Deshaun Foster is an intriguing hire, and whether people will want to transfer into UCLA as they gear up for their first season in the Big Ten. And that will do it for episode number 1, the Conference USA preview show here on Zeke-ollege Football. From WJMF Radio, from Zeke Kransdorf, this has been episode number 1 of Zeke-ollege Football. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, and have a safe rest of your day.